Welcome to Wolf Sanctuary. Orchids at 9, lunch at 1, murder in between. Tell us where you're listening from. The case starts now. Nero Wolfe and the corpse behind the velvet screen. Thursday night in Hell's Kitchen carried the kind of chill that stuck to your collar. I arrived early, ticket folded twice in my breast pocket, the doorman giving me the kind of look that says you don't belong, but you're dressed too well to toss. The Velvet Screen Theatre stood crooked between a pawn shop and a deli that smelled like boiled onions. The marquee blinked with tired bulbs. Variety tonight, live review at 8. Lily had called the day before. "Archie, darling, just one favour. Madeline's nervous, right? Her first real job running lights. Can't you drop by, be a face in the crowd?" Madeline was Lily's friend, which meant she was someone I hadn't dated. Yet. Inside, the place smelled of dust, perfume, and the long-dead ghosts of cheaper acts. Heavy red drapes framed a modest stage. The crowd filled up in pairs, off-duty cabbies with their girls, a few tired dames in gloves, and a scattering of theatre types smelling faintly of gin. The show started at 8 sharp. A house band under a chipped proscenium played Cole Porter like they were in mourning. First came a juggler with more sweat than grace. Then a singer in velvet who looked 15 feet tall under the spotlights and sounded like bourbon through a cigarette filter. I watched, amused, counting the stagehands and exits. An old habit. At least 3 ways out, maybe 4 if the rope ladder backstage hadn't rotted through. Madeline had waved from the wings before the curtain rose, thin and twitchy, headset crooked, her clipboard shaking like it had caught a fever. 10 acts in, a mentalist guessed a lady's handbag contents and missed the lipstick. He blamed residual vibrations. The audience applauded anyway. Then the MC stepped out, tuxedo, smile pasted on like cake icing. "And now," he said, "our final act, the conjurer of the impossible, the phantom of prestidigitation himself, Vincent Vayne." The lights dimmed, spotlights narrowed, music curled up into a single, trembling note. A tall man in a black cloak stepped forward and bowed, fingers raised like he meant to hypnotize the front row. He was halfway through the first illusion, a dove from a velvet sack, when it happened. The curtain behind him twitched again, then froze. A woman in the audience gasped, just one voice among hundreds. The dove flapped off stage, forgotten. Vayne glanced behind him, frowning. The curtain wouldn't draw. The lights flickered. One of the stagehands ran out, whispered something. The crowd murmured, stirred, then fell oddly quiet. A scream cut through the silence like a wire snapping under tension. Not from the audience. Backstage, female, high, sudden and sharp. Then the velvet curtain peeled open just enough to show the horror behind it. A man, slumped in the shadows, his head tilted unnaturally against the painted backdrop of a castle. Blood soaked the collar of a tuxedo. One shoe was missing, and in the center of his forehead, a black hole, round and clean. Gasps, then panic. People rose to their feet. Ushers called out. A man yelled for a doctor. Madeline stumbled out of the wings and vomited behind a speaker cabinet. I moved toward the aisle, fast but not rushed. The kind of walk you learn when you've been near more dead men than you can count on one hand. The smell of powder was faint, but it was there. A recent echo, not the theatre's usual dust. The curtain fell back in place. Too late. The show was over. I ducked past the ushers and caught the edge of the stage. A red-haired woman in feathers fainted in the second row. Someone tried to help her and got slapped. The backstage corridor smelled like grease paint and fear. Madeline was sitting on a stool, knees drawn up, still pale. "Archie," she started. "Don't talk, just breathe." I moved past her into the wings. The lighting rig was half down. The velvet curtain trembled in the draught from the stage door, now propped open. A cop was already there, young, wide eyes, cap crooked. "Who are you?" he asked. "Good evening, I'm Archie Goodwin, private detective. Not on the job tonight, unless you need help." He looked me up and down, then back at the body. "You with the press?" "Not quite, but I do take notes." The victim lay at centre right, just off the painted forest backdrop. Evening wear, pocket square folded too neatly for a real man. His hand still clutched a theatre programme. I leaned in. No wallet, no ID, one cufflink missing. "Anyone touch the scene?" I asked. The cop nodded, sheepish. Stagehand tried CPR. On a man with a hole in his head. He panicked. I straightened and walked the perimeter. A patch of blood had smeared under the edge of the curtain pulley. There was a faint scuff mark near the stage trapdoor. Someone had dragged something, or someone. The body hadn't fallen there, it had been moved. 2 theatre techs hovered near the ropes. One lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "Who found him?" I asked. The one with the cigarette jerked a thumb toward the trapdoor. "I did. He was lying there when I went to check the line." "What's his name?" "We don't know." The MC approached, older, jowls red with panic. His name was Philip Arden, theatre critic. He came backstage before curtain, said he was meeting Carla. "Carla who?" "Carla Venn, our business manager." "Where is she?" "No one's seen her since the show started." I walked to the trapdoor and looked down. A ladder descended into black. The smell of rope and mildew rose from it. Who had access? Everyone in the crew, but no one's supposed to be down there during a live show. Someone was. I returned to Madeline, who was now clutching a cup of cold water. "Did you see him come backstage?" She nodded. "I gave him a visitor's pass. He didn't even look at me." "Did he say who he was meeting?" "No, just smiled and walked in." The police were arriving now in full force. Uniforms, flashbulbs. Then came a familiar voice, gravel, irritation, and cigar smoke wrapped in one package. "Goodwin, what in blazes are you doing here?" Inspector Kramer, tan trench coat, hat tilted forward like he was charging the weather. "Enjoying a night out," I said, "until your scene stealer upstaged the whole review." He sighed, deep and fed up. "I suppose Wolfe already knows?" "Not yet, but if I were you, I'd call him before someone else does. A dead critic, a missing woman, and a curtain that won't close. It has all the makings." Kramer snorted. "Tell your boss to stay out of it." "I would," I said, "but he's got a thing for velvet." I stepped into the alley, lit a cigarette, and looked up. The marquee still flickered. Live review at 8. And somewhere behind the velvet, the echo of a gunshot still hung in the air. Curtains drawn, scene set. The play had just begun. The sun had barely risen above the rooftops of West 35th when Fritz knocked once on the office door, his signal for something peculiar. I was seated behind my desk, pencil in hand, working on last night's notes from the theatre. Wolfe, of course, occupied the yellow chair with one eye closed and the other disapproving of the Times. "There is a lady," Fritz said from the threshold, refusing to leave. Wolfe didn't look up. "Then let her refuse in silence." Fritz, who had spent the last 20 years tolerating that tone, merely added, "She's wearing crimson gloves." Wolfe's eyelid lifted slightly. I set down the pencil. "Crimson gloves?" I asked. Fritz nodded. "And a matching hat, very precise." That was enough to interest even Wolfe, though he wouldn't say it. He motioned with 2 fingers. I crossed the hall and opened the front door. The woman waiting there didn't flinch. She looked me over as one might appraise a painting. Not hostile, not warm. Just exact. She wore a dark wool suit, trim at the waist. The gloves were indeed crimson, soft leather, barely creased. Her lipstick matched them without apology. "Miss Carla Venn," she said. "I won't take long." I let her in. The red client chair matched her gloves a little too well. She sat with her back straight and her handbag resting like a verdict on her lap. Wolfe looked at her without rising. "You may proceed." "I'm here because someone was murdered," she said, "and they think I did it." Wolfe made a low sound that wasn't a word. I took out my notebook. Carla Venn didn't fidget. "The man found behind the curtain, Philip Arden, was my fiancé." I blinked. "That wasn't public knowledge," she continued. We kept it private for professional reasons. He reviewed productions for the Evening Echo. I managed the finances at the Velvet Screen Theatre." Wolfe was silent. "I was seen backstage," she said, 10 minutes before the body was discovered. I can't deny it. I went to speak with him." "Why?" Wolfe asked. Her jaw moved once before she answered. "He told me something about a threat. Someone he claimed was blackmailing him." Wolfe raised his head half an inch. "Whom?" "He wouldn't say, only that it involved money. And something from before he came to New York. But now the police think I had a motive. Because he died and I can't prove I left the wings before the shot." "You're being questioned?" I asked. "Yes. I've spoken to Inspector Kramer. He was courteous, but clear. I need someone with leverage." Wolfe closed the newspaper. "You assume I care for your innocence, Betty," he said. She smiled, but faintly. "No, I assume you care for orchids." That froze him. "My late fiancé," she said, "recently met with a collector, a Mr. Horace Willoughby. He mentioned it in passing. I recall because the name was so peculiar." "Where?" Wolfe asked. "At the Carnegie Orchid Exchange 2 weeks ago. Philip said Willoughby offered him a rare Peruvian hybrid in return for a favour, but he wouldn't say what favour." Wolfe glanced at me. "Your gloves," he said, "are Florentine." "I studied in Milan." "You are precise." She didn't answer. Wolfe exhaled. "Miss Venn, I do not work for the desperate or the doomed, but if what you've said is accurate, then you have introduced an element of botanical interest." She stood. "Then you'll help?" "I shall inquire," he said. "Nothing more." That was Wolfe's version of a handshake. I walked her to the door. She didn't ask questions or thank me, just paused in the vestibule and looked once at the stained glass transom as though memorizing it. Then she stepped out into the morning cold, crimson gloves vanishing down the stone steps. When I returned, Wolfe had already pushed aside the newspaper and turned to face the window. "She's lying," he said. "To which part?" "Not about the engagement. That she believes. But the blackmail." "You think it was a cover?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that a man threatened with blackmail rarely delays, and he rarely confides in a woman if he intends to act." "She could be the one who threatened him." "Possibly." He closed his eyes. "But what interests me," he murmured, "is Willoughby." "You've heard the name?" "Briefly. He submitted an article on Peruvian hybrids last year. It was verbose." "That's high praise from you." Wolfe opened his eyes again. "Archie, I want you to call the Carnegie Orchid Exchange. Inquire discreetly. Then locate this Willoughby and determine whether his proximity to the deceased was coincidental or curated. And if I find a bloody orchid in his coat..." Wolfe sighed. "Then you may ask him if it was a gift or a trophy." I picked up the phone. The operator took 3 tries to get through. When she did, a dry-voiced woman confirmed that a Horace Willoughby had attended a private auction on the 15th, 1 week prior. He'd purchased 2 Vanda seedlings and left alone. She remembered him because he requested the receipts in French. I relayed the details to Wolfe, who grunted in response. By noon, I had an address, West 78th, top floor, with a note from the landlord that Willoughby paid rent in cash and kept to himself. Before I left, Wolfe instructed Fritz to prepare veal for luncheon and asked me to obtain a photograph of the deceased. "Why?" I asked. To verify he is, in fact, deceased. You think Carla lied about the body? I think women who match their gloves to their lipstick seldom tell all. He leaned back. Go. I left the brownstone with my overcoat buttoned and my revolver holstered, not because I expected trouble, but because trouble often expects you. By the time I reached Willoughby's Street, the clouds had lowered themselves like a stage curtain. A dog barked somewhere near the fire escape. The building was 6 stories and smelled of linseed oil and old tobacco. The top-floor apartment had a lace curtain in the window and a rubber plant on the sill. I knocked once. No answer. Twice. Still nothing. I pressed my ear to the door. Faint movement inside. A floorboard creaked. "Mr. Willoughby," I called. "This is Archie Goodwin. I'm not the police." Silence. "I work for Nero Wolfe." The lock clicked. The door opened 2 inches. A man with silver hair and a fragile mouth peered out. His eyes were the colour of old paper. "Yes? I'm here about Philip Arden." The door opened no further. "I don't know him. You met him 2 weeks ago at the exchange."
That was business. Everything is.
He closed the door again, not slammed, closed.
I waited a full minute, then left.
When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was seated with a copy of Horticulture Monthly in one hand and a forkful of veal in the other. "Well?" he asked. "He's nervous."
He should be.
"And Carla?"
Wolfe took another bite.
"She is already drafting the next move," he said. "The question is whether it will involve a lawyer or another corpse." The man's wallet was a liar. 2 of them, in fact. One was tucked inside his breast pocket, the leather stitched tight, bearing a business card for Philip Arden, theatre columnist, Evening Echo. The other, wedged beneath a folded programme in his inside coat lining, held a driver's licence, a studio punch card, and 2 pay stubs made out to Carl Kenton. That morning I stood in the hallway of the Midtown precinct with both sets in my coat and a question turning over in my head like a loaded coin. 1 man, 2 names. I'd seen Kramer an hour before, voice frayed, patience worn, suit already wrinkled at the collar. He didn't want Wolfe involved. That meant Wolfe was about to be. Back at the brownstone, the orchids were drinking in steam, and Wolfe was not to be disturbed. I knew better than to interrupt unless a corpse sprouted petals. So I waited. At 11:40, the door opened. Wolfe entered the office, towel around his neck, sleeves rolled, and forehead lined. "You are in possession of facts," he said, settling into the yellow chair. "Deliver them." I placed the contents of the 2 wallets on his desk in separate stacks. 2 IDs, same face, same corpse. Wolfe reached for the Kenton license. "Carl Kenton, 32, studio accountant for Excelsior Pictures, payroll division." He picked up the theatre card. "And yet here we have Philip Arden, critic for the Echo, which is true." "Both," I said. "According to records, Kenton used his real name at the studio. Arden was a nom de plume, registered to the paper for 3 years. No cross-listing. No one at the Echo ever met him in person." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "How many people knew he led both lives?" "Not many. His editor claimed Arden submitted columns by courier. Kenton's co-workers thought he lived in Brooklyn. His mail went to a post box on the Upper East. Why the deception? Possibly income, possibly leverage. A man writing under 2 names gets to say twice as much with half the scrutiny." Wolfe grunted. "And the motive for dying?" "Still unclear, but Kramer said something interesting." I sat back. "He believes the killer knew about both identities, which narrows the field. Most critics get hate mail. Accountants don't, unless they're cooking the books." "Did the body show signs of a struggle?" "No. Shot cleanly. Execution style. Behind the velvet screen he was moved after death. No powder burns, tight grouping." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Kenton's duality may be the key. Kramer said the same. That's why he's coming here. He wants your take.
Wolfe opened one eye. He is coming.
Yes.
When?
I looked at my wristwatch. Now. A knock at the door confirmed it. Fritz answered, which meant the invitation had been phrased as official. Kramer entered, rain damp on his shoulders, hat in one hand, scowl in the other. "Wolfe," he said, "we've got a ghost with a bullet hole and no past." Wolfe gestured to the red chair. Kramer remained standing. "We've got 10 people who knew him as Kenton, 5 who knew him as Arden. None of them knew he was both." "Was he married?" Wolfe asked. "No."
Any family?
"Sister in Albany, estranged." "Lovers?" Kramer hesitated. We're still chasing that. A couple actresses might have known him outside work, but the name Kenton meant nothing to them. "Then he kept them separate," Wolfe said, as he did his motives. "What's your angle?" Wolfe folded his arms. "There is a plant," he said, "native to the Andean foothills, Vanda obscura. It flowers once, then dies, but before it withers, it releases a scent unlike any other. Bitter, complex. It exists to be forgotten."
Kramer blinked. And what does that mean?
Wolfe opened his desk drawer. From within, he pulled a folded note. It was torn from a ledger, written in tight, clean script. "Meeting, Willoughby. Bring records. No names." Kramer stepped forward and took the note. He read it twice, then again. "Where'd this come from?" "Found in the victims program," I said. "Folded behind the cast list. Wolfe hasn't touched it." Kramer scowled.
So he met with Willoughby? That's the theory, Wolfe replied. I require you to confirm it.
Kramer narrowed his eyes. "Why?" "Because," Wolfe said, "if Willoughby is entangled, then the murder may not be about names, but about records." "Financial?" "Possibly." Wolfe turned his gaze toward the window. "Mr. Kenton was an accountant, Arden a critic. Both professions deal in value, one by addition, the other by subtraction."
Kramer snorted.
"You think he was blackmailing someone?" "I don't know," Wolfe said. "But blackmail is a form of accounting, balancing risk against exposure." Kramer folded the note and pocketed it. "I'll talk to Willoughby, but don't start stirring the pot." "I shall do precisely what the truth demands," Wolfe said. "No more, no less." Kramer didn't reply. He left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "Archie."
Yes?
"Call the newspaper. Ask for copies of Arden's last 3 reviews. Any particular reason?" "I want to see what he chose to criticize." I crossed the room to the phone. The receptionist at the Evening Echo put me through to the arts desk. A man named Dellinger agreed to send over the columns by messenger. Wolfe stood and paced once, a rare movement, like a solar eclipse. "2 names," he said quietly. "2 professions, 1 corpse. That is not a coincidence. It is intent." The reviews arrived before 3. I handed them over. Wolfe unfolded the pages slowly. The first review shredded a failing operetta for what Arden called musical cowardice. The second praised a silent adaptation of Othello performed by a travelling troupe. The third caught Wolfe's attention. He read it twice, then a third time. "What is it?" I asked. He held the paper up. "This," he said, "is not criticism." I took the sheet. It was a glowing write-up of a modest review at the Velvet Screen, the same theatre where Arden had died. "He was killed the night after this ran," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said, "and I think he knew he would be."
You believe it was a message? I believe, Wolfe said, that Arden was sending a signal to someone, perhaps not the readers, perhaps not even to the theatre, but to a man who understood the words between the lines.
I read the last paragraph aloud. "In a city awash with counterfeit, there remains one velvet curtain worth parting, if only to glimpse the fraud behind it.
Wolfe nodded.
He was baiting someone,
Willoughby?
possibly, or someone in the review, someone who feared exposure. I set down the paper. Wolfe sat again, still. He died with 2 names, he said, but he wrote with 1 voice. Whoever silenced that voice feared what it might reveal. And Carla? Knows more than she told us, but I do not yet believe she killed him. Why not? She's too precise, Wolfe said. Murder, when done from fear, is always messy.
I nodded once, then glanced toward the window.
Outside, the clouds hung low over Manhattan, thick as secrets. The city held its breath, and in the brownstone the questions had only just begun. Kramer stepped forward and took the note. He read it twice, then again. Where'd this come from? Found in the victim's program, I said, but folded behind the cast list. Wolfe hasn't touched it. Kramer scowled. So he met with Willoughby?
That's the theory, Wolfe replied. I require you to confirm it.
Kramer narrowed his eyes. Why? Because, Wolfe said, if Willoughby is entangled, then the murder may not be about names, but about records. Financial? Possibly. Wolfe turned his gaze toward the window. Mr. Kenton was an accountant, Arden a critic. Both professions deal in value, one by addition, the other by subtraction.
Kramer snorted. You think he was blackmailing someone?
I don't know, Wolfe said, but blackmail is a form of accounting, balancing risk against exposure. Kramer folded the note and pocketed it. I'll talk to Willoughby, but don't start stirring the pot. I shall do precisely what the truth demands, Wolfe said. No more, no less. Kramer didn't reply. He left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Archie. Yes? Call the newspaper. Ask for copies of Arden's last 3 reviews. Any particular reason? I want to see what he chose to criticize. I crossed the room to the phone. The receptionist at the Evening Echo put me through to the arts desk. A man named Dellinger agreed to send over the columns by messenger. Wolfe stood and paced once, a rare movement, like a solar eclipse. 2 names, he said quietly. 2 professions, 1 corpse. That is not a coincidence. It is intent. The reviews arrived before 3. I handed them over. Wolfe unfolded the pages slowly. The first review shredded a failing operetta for what Arden called musical cowardice. The second praised a silent adaptation of Othello performed by a travelling troupe. The third caught Wolfe's attention. He read it twice, then a third time. What is it? I asked, and he held the paper up. This, he said, is not criticism. I took the sheet. It was a glowing write-up of a modest review at the Velvet Screen, the same theatre where Arden had died. He was killed the night after this ran, I said. Yes, Wolfe said, and I think he knew he would be.
You believe it was a message?
I believe, Wolfe said, that Arden was sending a signal to someone, perhaps not the readers, perhaps not even to the theatre, but to a man who understood the words between the lines. I read the last paragraph aloud. In a city awash with counterfeit, there remains one velvet curtain worth parting, if only to glimpse the fraud behind it. Wolfe nodded.
He was baiting someone. Willoughby?
Possibly, or someone in the review, someone who feared exposure.
I set down the paper.
Wolfe sat again, still. He died with 2 names, he said, but he wrote with 1 voice. Whoever silenced that voice feared what it might reveal.
And Carla?
Knows more than she told us, but I do not yet believe she killed him. Why not? She's too precise, Wolfe said. Murder, when done from fear, is always messy. I nodded once, then glanced toward the window. Outside, the clouds hung low over Manhattan, thick as secrets. The city held its breath, and in the brownstone, the questions had only just begun. The velvet screen looked different by day, emptier, like a magician after his last trick. The marquee was still dark. Inside, the lobby smelled of wax and floor polish. Someone had propped the backstage door with a paint-spattered wedge. I stepped past it and down the narrow corridor. The place was still half-lit, curtain half-drawn. Stagehands shuffled about like they were trying to remember which world they belonged to, stage or street. My first stop was the dressing room corridor. I found the illusionist in room 4, puffing on a thin cigar and polishing a pair of ivory-handled cuffs. "Vincent Vayne," I said. I'm Archie Goodwin." He glanced up, exhaled, and went back to his polishing. "You're Wolfe's man." "I've been called worse." He gestured toward a chair that was mostly coat. "I didn't kill him," Vayne said, "but I do regret not getting to finish my act." "You regret poor timing?" He shrugged. "There are worse things than death. Dying between illusions is one." I sat. "Arden, or Kenton, depending on which hat you liked, crossed paths with you?" "He reviewed me once," Vayne said, "a decade ago, called my act derivative. He wasn't wrong, but then I heard he'd been coming to rehearsals."
Why?
"Ask Carla." I did. "Then ask her again." He tapped ash into a broken teacup. "I'll tell you something off the record," he said. "This whole building's off the record. Philip, or Carl, was asking questions backstage about payroll. That's dangerous here. No one likes an accountant backstage." I left Vayne and found the lead actor in a sun-dappled alcove just off the wings, shirt unbuttoned, hair slicked back. He practiced lines in a mirror that didn't flatter. "Mr. Dorian Trent?" I asked.
You're interrupting focus.
"You were the last to share the stage with Arden." "I shared nothing," Trent snapped. "I was preparing my entrance. The man had no business back there. Critics belong in seats." "You disliked him?" Trent adjusted his collar. "I dislike dishonesty. He gave us praise we hadn't earned. That's how you ruin an actor. Inflate him."
So you'd prefer the truth?
"I prefer precision. Either love us or leave us, not both."
I stepped into the hallway. The door to the props room was half open. I knocked once and entered.
A young man with sleeves rolled to the elbow was coiling cable. He turned, blinked, and froze like I'd shined a badge at him. "Luther Kane?" I asked. "Yes, sir." "You were working the left curtain rig the night of the murder?" "Yes." "See anything strange?"
No, sir.
"That's fast." "I already told the police."
Tell me again.
He swallowed. "I was up in the catwalk. I heard the scream, came down, saw the crowd panicking. That's it." "You didn't hear the shot?" He shook his head.
Was the trapdoor open?
"I didn't check." "What's behind the screen?" "Storage crates, old flats, some lighting stuff." "And Arden's body?" "I didn't see it until the curtain stuck." I didn't press. He was scared, but scared isn't guilt. It's proximity. On my way back, I found the costume mistress in the fabric room, sewing a missing button onto a green blazer that looked like it had lost a war. "Miss Donnelly?" I asked. She didn't stop sewing. "You're the detective?" "One of them." She glanced up. Her eyes were shrewd. "I saw her," she said.
Carla Venn?
"Yes, she was backstage with Arden. They were arguing." "Did you hear what about?" "No. But her face was red. She slapped him hard." "Anyone else see?" She nodded.
Vayne. And the kid on lights. But neither will talk. They're afraid of what she knows.
"What does she know?" Miss Donnelly tied the thread and bit it clean. "Money, and men who like hiding it." I thanked Miss Donnelly and left her to the ruins of stage wardrobe. The building felt heavier on the way out, like the air had thickened with withheld truths. Outside, the afternoon wind had turned. I took a bench across the street and watched the theatre's rear door. No one came or went. The place was sealed by tension more than by law. I lit a cigarette and thought through what I had. Vayne had motive, if only bruised pride and professional curiosity. The payroll mention didn't sit right. Neither did the sudden approval in Arden's last review. Trent was all ego and polish, the kind who turns red under stage lights and vanishes off stage. Arden's praise had stung his vanity. I believed that. Luther Kane had the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much and been told to forget it. And then there was Carla. She'd argued with the victim. She'd slapped him. And she was still very much a ghost in this building. Spoken of, but never present. I flicked the cigarette away and crossed the street again. Inside, I made a second pass down the hallway and found the lighting tech, Madeline, Lily Rowan's friend. She was in the cue booth, flipping through a small notebook. "Busy?" I asked. She looked up. "No, just sorting cues." "You saw Carla with Arden?" She hesitated. I did.
Did she look angry?
She looked scared.
That was new.
"Scared of Arden?" "No," Madeline said. "Scared of what he'd say."
Did he threaten her?
"I don't think he needed to." She asked him not to go on stage. He laughed. "Then what?" "Then she left. He followed. 10 minutes later, we were in blackout." I nodded. She pulled a folded scrap from her pocket. I shouldn't have kept this. It was a ripped corner of a ledger page. On it, scrawled in pencil, CK, HW, 4K weekly, confirm Fry, no audit. I folded it and tucked it into my inside pocket. "Where did you find it?" "In the light booth, under the cue sheets." "Did you tell anyone?" She shook her head. "Good, don't." By 4:30 I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe was halfway through a plate of trout. I waited until he set the fork down. "Well?" he asked. I laid the facts out one at a time. Names, statements, the slap, the page from the ledger. He took the scrap and read it twice. "CK is Kenton, HW is Willoughby," he said.
4,000 weekly? I asked.
"Embezzlement," Wolfe said, "or laundering. The page suggests routine payments. No audit implies internal concealment." "Studio money? Or ticket revenue?" I poured myself a beer and leaned against the desk. "Everyone backstage claims to have disliked Arden, but no one says why. No grief, no affection, just fear and friction." "Which means," Wolfe said, "he was probing something all of them had touched." I nodded. "He got too close. The mask slipped. Someone reached for the pistol." Wolfe tapped the armrest. "I want Willoughby here," he said, "within the week."
That may take some persuasion.
"Then persuade." He closed his eyes. "And Miss Venn?" Still silent. Wolfe inhaled. "Then she's either waiting for the noose, or she's tightening it." Horace Willoughby lived 3 floors up in a crumbling brownstone on the Upper West Side. Wolfe was seated with a book open on his lap, a small globe of butter melting slowly into a dish of warm lentils. "Well?" he asked. I gave him the details, the orchids, the fear, the pass under the moss. When I mentioned the name Merle Dantle, Wolfe's eyebrows lifted. "He was a booking agent," Wolfe said. "Briefly connected to an embezzlement inquiry, then vanished. His death was ruled suicide. 2 years ago. Yes? And now the dead man's ledgers are back in play." "Possibly," Wolfe said, "or someone merely wishes them to appear so." I handed him the theatre pass. "Willoughby lied," I said. "He was at the Velvet Screen, recently." Wolfe turned the pass over in his palm. "Mud from a back alley," he said. "Most likely the service door." "He says Arden wanted names. Did he offer any?" "Carla Venn." Wolfe set the pass down. "No man mixes orchids and murder without intending both to bloom." I raised a brow. "Meaning?" "Willoughby is a weak man. Eccentric, yes, but not murderous. Still, he holds pieces because..." pieces too sharp for bare fingers. "What about the coat check stub?" "Trace it," Wolfe said. "Find out whose coat was never claimed." I took that as dismissal. On the way out, I paused beside the orchid room. Fritz was watering the Miltoniopsis. "Fritz," I said, "do orchids lie?" He glanced over his shoulder, faint smile under the moustache. "They don't lie," he said, but they often die quietly." Back in the office, Wolfe folded the theatre pass into a napkin and placed it atop the globe of butter. I didn't ask why. Some things, with Wolfe, simply bloom in their own time. Theatre by daylight is a strange animal, half-shadowed, always yawning. The velvet screen had reopened for rehearsals, but not for the public. I walked through the front door with the confidence of someone who'd already seen the body. The lobby was deserted. A soft echo rose from the stage. Voices, stilted and rehearsed. I moved down the corridor without announcing myself. No ushers, no protest. The air smelled of dust, varnish, and last week's crime. From the wings I could make out two actors mid-scene. One of them, Dorian Trent, was speaking too loudly. The other, a nervous understudy, missed his mark and got a grunt in response. No director in sight, no notes being taken. I slipped backstage and made for the rigging bay. The place was colder than the rest of the theatre. Black curtains pooled on the floor like velvet puddles. Someone had forgotten to sweep. A rope pulley creaked overhead, shifting slightly. I waited until the voices on stage hit a crescendo, then ducked behind a lighting scaffold. Halfway up, wedged into the second brace, was a square of fabric. Dark, frayed, and barely visible. I climbed quietly. The gloves were torn, one split clean at the thumb, the other had a faint, dark smudge along the inner wrist. They were small, elegant, and crimson. Same shade Carla Venn wore the day she visited Wolfe. I slipped them into an envelope I'd brought and sealed it tight. No fingerprints, not that Wolfe trusted them anyway. Then I noticed the matchbook. It had been wedged under a steel bolt, burnt halfway down one side. The gold embossing on the cover was still legible. CV. Carla's initials, stamped in a scroll pattern, just above a stylized orchid bloom, very tasteful. I opened it. 2 matches remained, the rest were blackened. Someone had used it recently, and discarded it without thinking. That wasn't like Carla. Voices behind me sent me lower on the rig. I tucked the envelope into my coat and climbed down, slowly. A woman's voice, sharp, low. "I said he's watching everything we do." A pause. A man replied, "You don't know that." "I know what Arden said." Silence. Then retreating footsteps. I moved fast, exiting left, through the set corridor. In the green room, Madeline was sorting cue sheets. "Rehearsals not going well?" I asked. She jumped slightly. "Not since the murder." "Anything unusual today?" "A stagehand didn't show. Luther said he was sick." "That unusual?" "He never misses." I made a note. "Anyone ask questions about me?" She blinked. "You mean today?" "Since I left." "Vayne did. Trent too. But they didn't like your questions." "Few people do," I said. "What about Carla?" "She hasn't been in today. But she has been recently. Twice, once yesterday. She met with the director in the back hall, didn't stay." "Did she go backstage?" "Not that I saw." I gave her a soft nod and stepped back out. The rehearsal was still going. Trent's voice boomed through a line that should have been whispered. I exited through the alley door, which opened to a narrow stretch of brick and damp trash bins. A cat darted out from beneath a broken crate. Light snow was starting to fall. I walked 2 blocks before hailing a cab. Wolfe was expecting me. And I had crimson gloves. Fritz let me in without a word. The brownstone smelled of onions and stock. Dinner was still an hour off. I hung my coat and made straight for the office. Wolfe was in the yellow chair, sipping a glass of beer. A book on ancient horticulture lay open on his lap, spine cracked at a diagram of Andean moss. "You're late," he said. "I'm effective." I placed the sealed envelope on his desk. He set the book aside without closing it. "Proceed." "Found backstage, Wesosikie," I said. "Lighting rig, second brace. Hidden, not lost." He opened the flap and used the handle of his letter opener to draw out the gloves. He studied them without touching the fabric directly. "Crimson," he said. "Small, torn, distressed."
And familiar.
"Yes." I handed him the matchbook. He held it closer to the lamp. "Orchid design, initialed." "Matches her calling card," I said, "but right down to the gold ink." Wolfe didn't speak for a moment. "She claimed she lost her gloves last week." "She did. And now they are found backstage in a location not accessible by accident." "Correct," he exhaled through his nose. "Miss Venn is either more careless than she appears or more deliberate." I sat across from him. "Luther Kane's missing rehearsal. Madeline thinks that's unusual." "I agree. And Carla hasn't returned to the theatre since yesterday, but someone was using her matchbook." He drummed one finger against the armrest. "Why hide gloves?" he asked.
"To avoid recognition," I said, "or delay suspicion."
"Then they were hidden after the murder." I nodded. "That's the likeliest."
He leaned forward.
"Archie, gloves are not evidence of murder. They are evidence of movement, of proximity." Then she was close. Or someone close to her was. He tapped the matchbook once more. "These details trouble me. Because they're too neat. Because they're too convenient." I raised an eyebrow. "Planted?" "Perhaps," he said. "But planted for whom?" I poured myself a beer from the side table. She knew Arden was digging. If she found out how much, she may have tried to get ahead of it.
By removing traces.
Or leaving others. Wolfe looked at the gloves again. "One is torn. Why? Panic or staged panic? And the matchbook?"
Used recently, burnt halfway. He lifted the corner with the tip of a pen.
"Whoever used this did so under pressure. No man lights his way backstage unless he's afraid of the dark." I took a long drink and leaned back. "You think she killed him?" "I think she fears something worse than being blamed for his death." I let that hang between us. "She has not returned," Wolfe said, "because she does not know what remains to be found." "Well, now we do." He closed the envelope again and set it aside. "We have gloves, a matchbook, a silent rehearsal, and a ledger that never belonged in that theatre. Do we tell Kramer?" "Not yet." Wolfe stood, which, as always, meant something was serious. "Have Fritz arrange a call to Willoughby tomorrow, early. I want to know how many hands touched that orchid." I nodded. Wolfe stepped toward the orchids by the window. Outside, snow fell soft against the glass. He adjusted one bloom slightly. "One doesn't rehearse silence," he said. One prepares to hide it."
I didn't ask what he meant.
In Wolfe's world, truth didn't arrive loud. It crept in quietly, through velvet curtains, withered gloves, and burnt gold paper. The call came just after 10. Kramer's voice was tight and straight to the point. "Your girl's alibi just folded. Get downtown." I didn't ask what part folded or how. When Kramer invited you to the station, it wasn't for the coffee. The precinct was a stone block on Lafayette with a cracked window and a desk sergeant who looked like he'd chewed through half the borough. Kramer met me inside, already walking. "She said she left the theatre at 8:10. We pulled traffic cams. Her car didn't leave until 8:36. Maybe she was waiting for the rain to stop." "She was backstage," Kramer growled. "We got 3 crew now who saw her by the lighting rig. That matchbook you found, it wasn't the only thing she dropped." We reached the interrogation room. Carla sat at the table, hands folded, eyes dry. No gloves, no lipstick, no performance.
She looked at me, not surprised.
Kramer didn't sit. Miss Venn, this is Mr. Goodwin. He works with Wolfe. He's here because you've told half a story, and now we need the rest. She looked at her lap. I didn't kill him.
That's not the question, I said. The question is, why were you lying?
Her throat moved once. She looked up.
I was afraid.
Kramer raised an eyebrow. Of what? She inhaled, long and silent. Of what people would think. That I had a reason. That I... She stopped.
I went backstage to confront him. About what?
She hesitated. Money.
Kramer stepped closer.
You were involved in the books? No.
Then what?
Gambling, she said. Philip owed money, a lot. He said he'd paid it back, but I knew he hadn't. Whom did he owe?
I don't know, she said. He wouldn't say, just that someone from the old days was pressing him. Someone who used to work with a man named Danton.
I sat.
And you went backstage to ask him what?
To tell me the truth. He laughed. He said it didn't matter anymore, that it was all about to end anyway. I slapped him. Then what? I left, I swear.
At what time?
I don't know, she said. A little after 8. Not before 8:10, Kramer said. And the curtain stuck at 8:40. That's a long 20 minutes. She looked at me again. I didn't shoot him, Archie. I wanted him to be afraid. But I didn't want him dead. Kramer walked to the corner and crossed his arms. We found gloves, torn, behind a lighting rig.
She closed her eyes. They were mine. Thought you lost them last week, I said. I did. I thought I did. I don't remember. I kept a second pair in my desk. Maybe those were the ones I left. She was flailing now. Controlled, but flailing.
You said he was blackmailed, I said. Did you see the ledger? No, but he had pages, old ones. He said they tied back to the theatre, to payouts made in cash. Names? He only said there was one name that mattered.
Whose? I don't know, she said. But he said it would bury them. Kramer stepped back to the table.
Where are those pages now? Carla's voice dropped.
I don't know. He said he'd hidden them, somewhere safe, but he never said where. And no copy?
Not that I know of. I folded my arms.
Why mention them at all? Because he wanted leverage, she said. He thought someone was closing in. He said the only way out was to make a deal. With whom?
I don't know. Kramer grunted. You're going to have to do better than that. I'm telling the truth. No, I said, you're telling a version that fits the room. She looked at me sharply.
I didn't kill him.
I nodded slowly. Maybe, but you were there. You slapped him. You had motive. Then you left. Or you say you did. But the gloves say otherwise. The matchbook says otherwise. I panicked, she whispered. I didn't know what to do.
That I believe, Kramer muttered.
We left her in the room. Outside, he closed the door with more force than was necessary. She's hiding something, he said. Plenty, I agreed. She may not have pulled the trigger, but she was close enough to hear it. I nodded. She's not the type to act on impulse, but fear, that moves people. Kramer rubbed his jaw. You think the gambling story's true? Part of it, enough to confuse the trail. He sighed. If Wolfe's got a theory, now's the time. He will, I said. He always does. I returned to the brownstone by cab. Rain had begun again, soft, persistent, like someone whispering at a locked window. Fritz opened the door and handed me a towel. He's in the office, he said, with the orchids. I nodded, dried my collar, and walked in. Wolfe was standing by the sill, hands behind his back. The Vanderbloom beside him had opened overnight. "You've spoken with her," he said. "Yes." "Sit." I sat. "She admitted being backstage," I said. "Claims she confronted Arden about gambling debts, said he mentioned someone connected to Dantle, said he had ledger pages, hidden."
Did she know where?
"No."
Do you believe her?
"Not entirely, but it's not a lie without a thread." He nodded once. "She's repositioning. That is always dangerous." "She's scared."
Yes, Wolfe said, but not of guilt. She's afraid of a mission, of what she didn't see.
He turned from the window. "There's something rehearsed about her spontaneity." I raised an eyebrow. "You think she came prepared?" "She knew the ledger would resurface. She did not expect the gloves."
What now?
"We find the missing pages," he said, "before someone else does." "Where do we start?" He looked down at the orchid bloom. Arden was a critic. He hid truth inside performance. Somewhere he left his review. I stood. "Then I'll start with his apartment." Wolfe nodded. "Take gloves, wear boots, use care, and Archie?" "Yes." "If there is a stage for murder, we are now well past intermission." I left the brownstone as the sky began to clear. But something else, somewhere, was about to take its final bow. Theatre dressing rooms always smell the same: talc, sweat, and ambition. This one had the added flavour of death. Arden's space was narrow, with chipped paint on the mirror frame and a cracked leather chair that hadn't supported a star since 1929. I'd asked Kramer for 10 minutes alone in it. He'd agreed, mostly because he didn't believe in notebooks with secrets.
I did.
The room hadn't been fully cleared. A few hangers on the wall, a comb in a mug. A crumpled overcoat with one shoulder darker than the other, likely from leaning against a dusty velvet backdrop.
The desk held a few theatre programmes. I opened one, then the next.
The third one stopped me. Blue ink, slanted notes written in a fast, clipped hand. Across the inner margin: "Friday, confirm rig, reel rolling before Act 3, keep eyes up." And below that: "No cue, let it run." I flipped the pages, more scribbles, a name: Luther. Then an odd mark, a circle with a slash through it. I checked the spine. The staples had been pried once and reset. Inside the cover, taped flat beneath the title page, was a note folded. I waited until his monologue ended. He turned, towel in hand. "You again?" he muttered. "Don't sound so enthused."
I'm not.
"You knew Arden was recording something." His face didn't change, but his silence did. "He had a reel," I said, "taped the night of the murder. Secretly. Did you know?" "No," he said, too quickly.
I stepped closer.
"You were afraid of what he'd say in print, but you were more afraid of what he might show." "Get out." "You saw Carla that night. You saw the slap. Maybe more. Maybe you were near the wings or the trap door." He stepped back. "I didn't kill him." "Then you better hope that reel never shows up." I left him sweating under the lights. The sun had gone by the time I returned to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office. The lamps were low. The air smelled of sandalwood and old paper. I sat, poured myself a glass of beer, and reported. "Kane fled south. Mailed a reel. Unknown destination. No return." "He mailed it to himself?" "Possible. More likely to an ally," Wolfe said. "Or someone he fears." "Trent's nervous."
Yes, but he's a man of vanity, not strategy.
I slid the playbill across the desk again.
Then what about this symbol?
Wolfe looked down. The blue ink mark, a circle with a line slashed through it. "I've seen it before," he said. "Stage direction shorthand, meant to denote a blackout." "A cue?" "A signal," he said, "to begin or to end."
I lit a cigarette.
If Arden wrote that, then he knew when the blackout would fall. He timed it. "To cover the act," Wolfe said, "or to expose it." Silence settled between us. Then Wolfe stood. We will not find the real by chasing it. We must find the man who needed it silenced. Kane? No. He turned. The one who sent Arden to Kane, the one who whispered about ledgers, the one who stood behind the curtain. I stared at him. Carla? Possibly. She said she feared exposure. And what is exposure, Wolfe said, but light at the wrong moment? I nodded slowly. We pressure Kane. We wait.
For what?
For the real, Wolfe said. It will appear, not because truth wants to be seen, but because someone thinks they can control the showing. And if they can't, then we have a second corpse. The next day, a package arrived. Plain brown paper, no sender, no postage mark, just a white label typed, for Wolfe, for truth, but not for cops. Inside, a film reel, unlabeled. Wolfe touched it like porcelain. It's time, he said. I arranged a projector. We shut the blinds, dimmed the lights. Fritz stood at the door. Wolfe remained seated. The reel began. No audio, just frames. The velvet screen. Backstage corridor. Arden, pacing, a script in hand. Then Carla, approaching, slapping him. He steps back, laughs. She leaves frame. Seconds pass. Another shadow enters. Not clear, but taller, broad. He lifts something. Arden jerks. Falls. No blood in the frame. Just collapse. Then the shadow vanishes. Fade to black.
I stopped the reel.
No one spoke. Wolfe leaned forward. Not Carla, he said. No. Then who? I rewound the reel, paused on the silhouette. Trent, the stance, the coat, the gesture. It was Trent, but not alone. Another shape, just before the fade, slips into view. Smaller.
Female.
2 people, I said. Wolfe nodded. The reel will burn the first, he said, but the second will burn it. We had proof and motive. Now we needed confession. And Wolfe.
He was already arranging the stage.
It was 11:15 when the call came. The tone on the other end was clipped, familiar, and unambiguous. Goodwin, get down to the Bronx. Kane's apartment. It's bad. Kramer didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I dressed in silence, layered coat over holster, and left the brownstone under a bruised sky. The air outside was cold, not winter, but the kind that warned you something was dying. Kane's apartment building stood 4 stories tall, with fire escapes rusting like the skeleton of a forgotten plan. The front door was ajar, held open by a brick. A uniformed officer nodded me inside. 3rd floor, end of the hall. The scent hit halfway up the staircase. Burnt cellulose, metal, and something sour underneath. Kramer stood near the doorway. His coat was buttoned to the neck. His eyes didn't blink much. "Don't touch anything," he said. "I wasn't planning to." The room was dark except for one overhead light, swinging slightly, casting slow shadows across the walls. Kane's body was hunched by the fireplace, knees drawn to chest, one hand stretched toward the grate. His mouth was open, his eyes weren't. The fire was long out, but the stink of melted film hung like smoke that couldn't leave. I stepped closer to the hearth. Inside, twisted and blackened beyond repair, were 3 concentric loops of film strip, fused, warped, and charred. Next to the fireplace, a metal reel sat on its side, no label. "Neighbors said they heard glass break," Kramer said. "That was 20 minutes before we arrived." "Who found him?" "Postman. Came to deliver a registered envelope. No answer. Door unlocked." I squatted beside the body. Kane had a welt under the right ear. Not big, but deep. "He wasn't killed by the fire," I said. "He was hit first." "Then they burned the reel," Kramer said, "to destroy evidence." "No," I corrected. "To make a point." I stood. "There's no second reel here, just this one, but the melted strip matches the one we saw yesterday. Same width, same edge spooling." Kramer folded his arms. He mailed the first reel. Yes, but he kept the second. Why? Insurance or conscience. A click behind us. Another detective. He held up an envelope in a plastic sleeve. Found this in the trash chute, burnt at one edge. Kramer took it. Inside, a torn piece of stationery. The only word legible was a name. Carla. We locked eyes. Kramer said nothing. I took one last look at Kane. The curve of his spine was unnatural, the kind that came from fear just before force. On the way out, I called Wolfe from a payphone on the corner. He answered on the second ring. Report! Kane's dead, reel's gone, burnt in his own fireplace. Was it murder? He didn't fall into the flames, if that's what you mean.
Cause?
Blunt force behind the ear. Time?
An hour ago, maybe less. Evidence? One envelope, torn, with her name.
Where are you now? Corner of Tremont and Franklin.
Return immediately.
He hung up. At midnight, Fritz served hot black coffee. Wolfe requested we convene in the office, a rare gesture at that hour. The windows were shut. The orchids, still under lamplight, filled the room with damp perfume. Wolfe sat, robe cinched, eyes sharp. Fritz stood to the side, quiet as always. I briefed them in detail. Kane's body, the fire, the envelope, the reel. Wolfe didn't interrupt. When I finished, he poured himself 2 fingers of beer and said, "This murder was framed like a painting, and someone's erased the signature." I set the burned film scrap on Wolfe's desk. He didn't touch it, just stared. The intent was theatrical, he said. Dramatic destruction, symbolic and crude. Whoever did this knew the reel mattered and knew we were close. Fritz handed him a linen napkin. Wolfe dabbed the corner of his mouth, though he hadn't eaten. Kane's silence is convenient. Time to the hour, not spontaneous. He mailed the other reel before he died, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, which means someone feared what it showed, or what it didn't. Fritz stepped forward. Do you believe the killer knew what was on the reel? I believe, Thomas, Wolfe said. The killer couldn't risk finding out. He looked at me. We will receive a message tomorrow, he said. Not a phone call, not a visit. Something subtler. Guilt rarely travels on foot. It arrives in envelopes. He turned to Fritz. Prepare a list, everyone present during the blackout, on stage and off. Fritz nodded. And Archie, track the postal logs. Find out where Kane's reel landed. If the recipient speaks, listen. If they hesitate, lean in. I poured another half-inch of beer. I don't like it, I said. I neither, Wolfe replied, but disliking murder does not unmake it. I rose early. The rain had passed, but the streets still glistened. I took a cab to the nearest postal distribution centre and handed over Kane's last known tracking number. The clerk, a thin man with nicotine fingers, raised an eyebrow. Delivered yesterday, he said. 1926 hours. Where? He flipped the log. Drop address, Midtown, Theatre District, not residential. He showed me the form. It had been sent to Stage Entry Records Limited, the same archival room listed on the back of the Velvet Screen's internal memos. I tipped him, made my way back toward Hell's Kitchen, and walked to the theatre's east entrance. Inside, a door behind the prop shop read, Archives. The lock was new, too new. I knocked. No answer. I picked it. Inside, a single room, steel shelves, a film projector, one desk. On the desk sat a flat canister. Unmarked, I opened it. Inside, blank reel, not Kane's. On the wall, a note, typed, clipped. Truth, like shadow, must be projected. Watch before speaking, speak before forgetting. Wolfe was right. We had received the message. Back at the brownstone, I delivered it word for word. Wolfe read it twice. Then again, he folded the paper. Trent? Possibly.
Carla?
Could be. Someone wants the real known but not held. He tapped the desk. A performance. A warning, I said.
No, Wolfe replied. A frame.
I looked at him. He gestured. The crime was crafted to be seen. The real was bait. But Kane complicated the script. He fled, delayed his line, mailed his cue. So they cut him and set fire to the scene. Still, I said, it's one thing to hide the truth. It's another to kill it. Wolfe closed his eyes. The first reel exposed a shadow, but not the hand behind it. The second would have lit the hand and the motive. And now it's ash. Yes. Fritz returned with the compiled list. Wolfe scanned it. His finger stopped on one name. He passed it to me. Valerie Danton. Merle Danton's sister? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said. Stage wardrobe. Worked the velvet screen under her married name. I stared at the page. She's never appeared in any interview. No, Wolfe said. But Kane's ledger notes mention VD twice, once beside the name Carla, once next to a payout. I stepped back. You think she's behind the ledger's disappearance? I think, Wolfe said, she's the one person who knew what Merle knew and knew how to erase it. Outside, thunder cracked. The case had split, not into chaos, into a performance, curtains still drawn, and someone waiting just off stage. The rain came in waves, tapping the brownstone's windows like a nervous pianist. It had been falling since dusk. Wolfe, predictably, had refused dinner conversation until it eased. When it didn't, he issued a decree between sips of beer. Go to Willoughby, he said. Tonight. I raised a brow. In this weather?
He has something we need.
You mean a confession? No, Wolfe said. An orchid. By the time I reached West 78th, my coat had taken on water like a small boat. The stoop was slick. The windows were fogged from within. Willoughby answered after 3 knocks. He looked worse than before, collar stained, eyes rimmed red, a tremor in both hands. You shouldn't be here, he said. Then why did you leave the curtain open? He moved aside. Inside, the room was humid and tense. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Trays of moss steamed softly on metal shelves. The air smelled like root rot and something sharper. Mr. Wolfe sent me. Willoughby sat without replying. I moved through the hothouse slowly. Same trays, same pots. But near the back, behind a stack of empty peat boxes, I found it. A single orchid stem, delicate and curled, lying atop a square of damp linen. The bloom was unmistakable. Masdevallia veitchiana. Rare, legally restricted.
And stained. The outer edge of one petal was tinged dark. Not soil, not rot.
Blood. Willoughby saw me notice.
He pressed his hands to his face. It wasn't supposed to go that far, he whispered. I didn't answer. He looked up. I didn't kill him.
Then why is that flower bleeding?
He stood, abruptly, too fast, and crossed to the orchid.
He brought it here, Arden. He knew, he said I'd imported it illegally, which I had, but no one cared, until he did. Why didn't you tell Wolfe?
Because it was shameful.
Illegal imports? No, the price. I waited. He said he'd keep quiet, in exchange for money, information, names from the exchange.
Blackmail.
He nodded. How much? 2,000 to start, then 5, then a name, then another. He wanted my entire network.
And if you refused?
He said he'd make it public, call the feds, ruin my license. Did you pay? I gave him half, in cash, in that envelope. The one torn from Kane's apartment? His eyes widened. I nodded. Yes, we found it, in the trash chute, with your name inside.
Willoughby sat down slowly.
I didn't kill him. Then who did? He shook his head. I gave him the orchid. He wanted it for something. Proof. Leverage. Maybe even as a gift, I don't know.
When was this?
2 days before the show. And you didn't see him again? He didn't answer. I stepped closer.
If you're lying, I'll find out. If you're protecting someone...
I'm not. Then help me stop this from happening again. He pressed a cloth over the orchid, blotting the stain like it might vanish. I thought orchids were supposed to be silent, he whispered, but this one screams. I let that sit in the air for a beat. Then I took the flower, linen and all, and left without another word. The cab ride back was slow. Traffic moved like molasses in a cracked bottle, and the rain had thickened into a sheet. Wipers squeaked across glass. The city blurred behind silver curtains. By the time I reached the brownstone, it was past midnight. Fritz answered with a dry towel and a look that said he'd stayed up on purpose. He's in the office, he said. He hasn't moved. Wolfe was seated, of course, dressing gown, slippers, beer untouched. The orchids beside him glistened in the lamplight like little witnesses. I handed him the linen-wrapped specimen. He didn't speak at first, just unfolded the cloth gently like a priest unwrapping scripture. When he saw the bloodstain, his eyes narrowed. Masdevallia veitchiana, he murmured. Rare, illegally acquired, grown too far north. It should not be here. He sniffed once.
Too damp. And this? He traced the edge of the petal with a fingertip. Is human blood.
Willoughby didn't deny it.
Did he name the source?
Arden, I said. He gave it to him. Days before the murder. Said Arden used it as leverage, threatened exposure, named names, demanded cash. Wolfe's brow creased.
Then the envelope in Kane's flat
Was Willoughby's. He admitted it. Wolfe leaned back. Did he claim to kill Arden? No, he claims he only paid him. He folded the linen and set it aside. This orchid is a statement, he said. It's not proof, it's theatre. Meaning? Arden didn't keep it as evidence. He displayed it, used it, blood on petals, a message. But for whom? I sank into my chair. Someone who knew what it meant, someone connected to the trade, someone who would see the flower and understand the threat. Wolfe nodded. Then Arden wasn't just blackmailing Willoughby, he was baiting a wider net, which makes the murder less personal and far more calculated. Fritz stepped in with a fresh pot of tea and a dry linen napkin. Wolfe turned to him. Fritz, tomorrow morning I'll want the Andean Orchid Registry for the last 2 years. Imports, confiscations, auctions, both legal and, unofficial, I added. Fritz nodded without blinking. And you, Archie, Wolfe said, will visit the exchange. See if anyone recalls Arden asking about Veitchiana. If he had a buyer, or worse, an audience. Why worse? Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had moved to the globe. He spun it slowly with one hand. She ran, I said. Took a train. To where? Not known, but she left with money, 4,000 of it. Wolfe nodded. Then Arden's blackmail wasn't one note. It was a symphony. You think she killed him? I think she feared he'd talk before she escaped. What about Carla? She may have authorized the payout, but the hand at the wire was not hers. Wolfe returned to his chair. He glanced once at the orchid on the windowsill. The blood had browned now, dry against the petal. Motives are like petals, Archie, lovely from one side, wilted from the other. He closed his eyes, and I suspect this one was planted. That evening I put out quiet feelers across Midtown. Yvette Harrow had no family listed in the city, no agent of record since September, but she had a reputation, sweet enough on stage, but sharper off it. A bartender near the theatre said she'd once claimed to be leaving for good. No one took her seriously. I did. By 9, I was at Grand Central. No one remembered her exactly, but one ticket clerk recalled a brunette in a feathered green hat asking about trains to Savannah. Savannah. A long way from Hell's Kitchen. I returned to Wolfe with a copy of the Terminal Manifest. She bought a one-way ticket 2 nights ago. He took the paper. Before the reel arrived. Yes. Before Kane was killed. Right. Wolfe tapped the edge of the desk with his finger. She feared exposure, he murmured. Not consequence. She believed the show was over. And the bonus? Paid with someone else's funds. It's theft, but more, it's silence. I sat.
She was being paid off? No, she was being paid to leave.
He lifted the wire receipt again. She was the loose end. Arden knew, Carla knew, perhaps Trent. But Yvette?
She vanished. Wolfe shook his head.
She was removed. I raised a brow. You think Carla orchestrated it? Possibly. But more likely, someone else moved the funds. Someone in accounting. Someone who knew how to bury a bonus. Prescott? No, Wolfe said. Too timid, but someone near him. Someone with access and confidence. He leaned back. Tomorrow we revisit the books, not the ledgers, the room, the people. He stood, a rare thing after supper. And the flower? I asked. He looked toward the Vaciana on the sill.
False petals, he said, like false friends, beautiful but not to be trusted.
He turned toward the door. Archie, he said, we are not hunting a murderer. No, we are chasing a producer, one who scripted this from opening scene to final blackout. He stepped out, and for the first time since Arden collapsed behind the velvet curtain, I believed him. Queens has a habit of swallowing people. Long streets, dull brick. Faces that mind their own business. It's where a person can vanish just by drawing the curtain. I found Delia Marr in a boarding house off Jamaica Avenue, room 2C. The matron at the desk called her Miss Moore, but the handwriting on the mail bin said otherwise. 2nd floor. 3 knocks. She opened it halfway, slender, nervous. Her lipstick was crooked. You're not the landlord? She said. No, but I have worse news.
Her eyes flinched.
I'm not here to hurt you, I added. I just want to talk about Arden. The door stayed half open for 5 seconds, then it opened all the way. She let me in. The room was small. 1 window, 1 iron bed. A chipped vanity. It smelled of hairspray and powder. Like backstage after curtain call. She sat in the chair. I stayed standing. I haven't been to the theatre, she said. I know, since the night Arden died. She lit a cigarette with unsteady fingers. He shouldn't have come back there. But he did, she exhaled.
He said he knew something big. I told him not to drag me into it.
Did he?
Yes, he always did.
I took a step closer. Miss Marr, we found a wire transfer, 4,000 sent to you. Her mouth tightened. I didn't ask for it. But you took it. I thought it was from Carla. She said it was a departure gift. That I'd earned it. Earned it how?
Her voice dropped.
By staying quiet. I nodded. About what? She stubbed the cigarette out, lit another. There's a payroll scheme. Cash from the box office, real sales, siphoned off before it ever hit the books. Split between Carla and Vayne. He rigged the show timings. Carla cooked the numbers. And Arden found out. Yes. He asked questions, got friendly with Luther, looked at rehearsal logs, payroll shifts, noticed the money didn't match the ticket stubs. So they paid you to keep quiet. She hesitated. Not exactly. Then how? He told me. Arden said he had a ledger, that he'd show me, but I got scared. I told Carla. She said she'd take care of it. The next day, the money came. in my name. No note.
So you ran?
She nodded. I thought if I stayed, I'd be next. Arden was smart, but too bold. He didn't know when to leave the stage. I crossed to the window. The curtain was drawn with a clothespin. Rain blurred the street below. Who killed him? She didn't speak. I don't think it was Carla, I said. Delia blinked. It wasn't? You're sure? She nodded. She was furious, but not deadly. Arden scared her, but she wouldn't kill him.
Then who?
Delia looked away. I don't know. Someone else found out. Someone higher.
Trent?
No. Willoughby?
She looked back at me.
I said higher. I paused. You mean the owners? Delia said nothing. Prove it. She opened the drawer beside the bed, pulled out a thin page, creased, soft from being handled. It was a rehearsal change sheet, but on the back, notes in Arden's hand, names, amounts, a title, velvet ledger. She handed it over. That's the only copy I kept. I took it. You shouldn't have stayed here. I didn't know where else to go. I folded the sheet into my coat pocket. Do you want protection? She didn't answer. But I saw it in her eyes. The answer was yes. I put her in a cab, told the driver to head east, keep the radio off, and not ask questions. I paid double the fare up front. She didn't look back. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was where I'd left him, seated, eyes closed, fingers steepled, orchids breathing behind glass. I placed the page on his desk. He opened his eyes before I said a word. He read it once, then again, slowly. There's handwriting on the reverse, he said. Arden's?
Confirmed. I watched him scribble enough margin notes to swear it.
Wolfe nodded. This ledger is a skeleton. Names, values, a pattern. Ticket laundering, I said. Box office cash rerouted, payroll inflated, Carla and Vayne. And a ghost in the wings, Wolfe added. Someone higher. I stepped to the window. The rain had stopped. She said it wasn't Carla who killed him. She's correct. He didn't pause. Carla arranged silence, but Arden died for the noise he planned to make. Someone feared what he would expose, not what he'd already said. Then who?
Wolfe tapped the margin of the page. This name here, KL, beside 3 larger amounts. That is not Vayne nor Carla. That's someone behind the books. I looked.
KL. Kenrick Lowell, Wolfe said. I blinked. The executive? The one who financed the last renovation? The same. He's never been mentioned, which is precisely how he prefers it. I paced once. He kills Arden to protect the stream. Carla is compromised but loyal. Vayne, a pawn, Wolfe said. Useful for distraction, loud, visible, but not trusted. And Delia? Collateral, Wolfe replied. He tried to erase her with money. It failed. I sat. Do we tell Kramer?
No.
Why? Because he'll arrest the illusionist, then Carla, and then nothing. Lowell remains untouched. The stream continues. The books are buried. Then what?
Wolfe stood.
It meant the hour was rare. We bait him, he said. With what? He turned to the orchid case, selected one bloom, pink-veined, tightly furled. This, he said, and the ledger, but not yet. I leaned forward. Explain.
He moved to his desk.
Tomorrow you will deliver a copy of the ledger to Lowell's secretary. No return address, no explanation, just a warning. Let him sweat. Then what? Then we invite the cast to dinner. All of them. Carla, Trent, Vayne, and the final name.
I looked again at the page.
There, scribbled in blue beside the final dollar entry, Danton Estate. Valerie, I said. Wolfe nodded.
Arden didn't just uncover fraud. He resurrected the dead. and someone killed to keep him buried.
I poured myself a scotch. How close are we? Wolfe lowered himself into the chair. Closer than the killer thinks. I looked out the window. Somewhere in Queens, a frightened woman watched street lamps from behind drapes. Somewhere else, a man with a clean name and a dirtied conscience waited for a knock that might never come. And in Wolfe's office, beneath a dry orchid and a single folded sheet, the noose had begun to close. The room was set by 5. The air was crisp, fire lit low, Fritz's silver tray polished until it blinked in the lamplight. Red guest chairs faced Wolfe's yellow throne like pews before a sermon. The orchids watched from the sill. At 5:30, the bell rang once. Fritz, as always, did not answer. I did. First came Carla, flanked by a nervous Dorian Trent, then the stage manager, Bixley, then Madeline, pale but upright, then Valerie Danton, in black gloves and a grey dress too modest for theatre. Inspector Kramer arrived last, trench coat still wet from drizzle, cigar unlit in his teeth. Archie, he said as he stepped inside, if this is another of Wolfe's drawing room tricks, then maybe this time it'll stick.
I led them in.
Wolfe was already seated, no preamble, no nod, just motioned to their seats and spoke when the last chair creaked into position. Ladies, gentlemen, you are here because deception has outlived its usefulness. I will speak plainly. You will listen plainly. A murmur. Carla glanced toward Trent. Kramer narrowed his eyes. Wolfe leaned forward. A man is dead. He died backstage, during a show. Shot clean through the forehead with a small caliber round. The assumption, shared by police, is that the shot came from a hidden weapon, fired in panic or in silence. Trent cleared his throat. With respect.
No, Wolfe said. You've earned none. That silenced him.
Wolfe continued.
What has not been considered is method. Motive has been addressed, but the means remains clouded. Arden was not simply shot. He was killed theatrically, during blackout, with precision, without panic. And that, gentlemen, is not murder. It is choreography.
He turned his gaze to Trent. You, Mr. Vayne, once performed a bullet act, the vanishing mark. I don't perform tricks anymore, Trent muttered. You stopped, Wolfe said, after a woman died, 1937, Chicago. Trent blinked. That was ruled an accident. It was ruled a misfire. Your assistant was hospitalized, but the casing was never recovered. You left town the next day. I don't see what that has to do. You don't have to, Wolfe said, because I do. He gestured to the center of the rug, where a shallow tray now sat, covered with black velvet. I stepped forward, removed the cloth. Beneath, a replica of the illusionist's bullet rig, constructed from a salvaged prop Wolfe had ordered yesterday. This, Wolfe said, is what you used, modified, concealed, reloaded.
Kramer leaned in.
You saying he used this during the show?
Wolfe nodded.
During blackout, with a simple fixed rig. One trigger, one shot. A moment later the light returned. The gun vanished with the act. Madeline's eyes went wide. That's why the cue came early.
Yes, Wolfe said, because it was never a cue. It was cover.
Trent stood. This is absurd. No, Wolfe said. What's absurd is believing a man died on stage and no one saw how, unless they were trained not to see. Trent moved to speak. Kramer rose. Sit down, he said. Trent did. Wolfe gestured to Carla. You knew Arden had information, but not the depth, not the real, not the names. You authorized a payment. You did not authorize a murder. She said nothing. You believed it was over, that he could be bought, but someone else decided he couldn't. Kramer turned to Wolfe. You saying Trent acted alone? No, Wolfe replied. He acted precisely because he was told to. Not by Carla, not by Danton, by someone who feared exposure, someone who knew about the ledger. He looked at Valerie.
Your brother kept notes.
She met his gaze without blinking.
Yes?
Do you know where they are?
She nodded. They're in a vault, midtown. Will you release them?
She hesitated. Yes. Wolfe leaned back. Then we have our signature. He turned to Kramer. Now you may arrest someone. Kramer stayed standing. Let's make this clear. You're saying Trent rigged a prop, shot a man, on cue, during a blackout. Yes, Wolfe said. With intention, not impulse. Trent was sweating. His collar wilted. You think I murdered him with a stage gag? No, Wolfe said. You murdered him with a profession. You used your skill, not to entertain, but to execute. And you used a blackout, not to hide, but to time the moment. Trent glanced at Carla. She did not look at him. Wolfe gestured to me. I stepped forward and placed a small envelope on the tray. Recovered from the prop chest backstage, but I said. Cleaned, dry, disassembled. Inside, a hand-tooled brass component, small enough to disappear in a pocket, Wolfe continued. You dismantled it afterward. Hid it with your own tools. That was your mistake. Illusions require disposal. Murder does not. Kramer turned. Vayne Trent, he said, voice hardening. You're under arrest. Trent didn't resist. He just slumped back and said nothing as Kramer's men entered and led him out. The room stayed silent. Fritz appeared, as if on cue, and removed the tray. Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Danton, he said, without opening them, I believe your brother meant to bring these books forward, not to threaten, but to redeem himself. Valerie nodded.
He did.
You will release them tomorrow? Yes. Then let the curtain fall.
She rose, gloves still on, and walked out alone.
Carla stood next. What happens to me? Wolfe opened his eyes. You knew of theft, of silence, but not of death. If you cooperate, the law will weigh it accordingly. She gave a brittle nod. I'll speak to the bureau. Madeline left quietly, Kramer after her. That left me, Wolfe, and the orchids.
I poured 2 fingers of beer and handed him the glass.
Well, I said, we broke the illusion.
He sipped. No, we understood it. Broke illusions fade. The true ones become memory.
I sat. You knew it was Trent. I suspected, but only when Valerie confirmed the ledger's location did it align. The trick, the timing, the false cue. I leaned back. You think Carla's clean? No, he said, but I think she's finished, and that's different. He lifted the brass mechanism. It takes talent to disappear something this small in a moment. Talent wasted. Talent redirected. Rain began again, soft against the windows. The fire settled. Wolfe raised his glass. To the theatre, he said. May its lies stay on stage. I clinked mine against his, and may the curtain never fall too soon. Fritz lit the last taper just as the doorbell rang. The table was set for 7. The room was warm with roast duck and mustard greens, and the air was stained with clove and sherry. The wine breathed in Wolfe's decanter like it had been waiting all day to be judged. Guests filed in with expressions that didn't match the menu. Carla came first, face composed but stiff as pressed linen. Then Madeline, lips tight. Valerie Danton arrived with silence in her gloves. Trent, or what was left of him, followed, escorted by Kramer, who removed his coat and kept his hand close to the inside pocket. They took their places. Fritz served in order. Wolfe nodded, but did not eat. I remained standing. When the plates had been touched, Wolfe cleared his throat. You may be wondering why I have invited you here. It is not to comfort the guilty or entertain the innocent. It is to finish a performance. No one interrupted. He gestured to Fritz, who brought forward a leather folder, slim, flat. Wolfe opened it like scripture. This is the timeline, as reconstructed from notes, records, and deliberate omissions. You will follow, or you will leave. No one moved. First, the theft. Weeks before Arden's death, ticket receipts began to vanish, payrolls inflated, boxes miscounted. Carla Venn, as business manager, observed the discrepancies. She approached Trent. He looked at her. She did not deny it. He proposed a solution. Rather than report, they would balance books quietly. But balance turned to cover-up. Trent's accounts were cleaner than Carla's patience. She kept her hands in the drawer. He used them. Wolfe turned a page. Enter Arden. Smart, arrogant, suspicious. He asked questions, he watched hands, he found inconsistencies, and he wrote them down. He held up the velvet ledger page, the one Delia had given me. In this list are every inflated paycheck, every redirected tip, every side-pocketed dollar, including one name not present until now.